I'm Reverend Phil, and I'm your host for Words of the Prophets. Where are our prophets now? Where are those messages God chooses to communicate divine revelation through? In the past, the Creator has sent prophets like Abraham, Siddhartha, Jesus, Muhammad, and many more. Maybe our higher power has switched tactics since we reinterpret God's words as soon as the Creator's prophets leave us. Could it be that Spirit talks to each one of us individually and we haven't learned to listen? On Words of the Prophets, our modern prophets show us how to find the internal prophet that is the I Am, and we discuss the application of spiritual principles in all aspects of our lives. Love and light, everybody. I'm Reverend Phil, and I'm your host for Words of the Prophets. Today, my guest is Rabbi Marvin Schwab of Temple Bet Shalom right here in Santa Fe. Welcome aboard, Rabbi.
Thank you, Phil. It's good to be here.
Wonderful to have you. Today's topic, which has actually been chosen by the Rabbi, and you'll see why in a little bit, is Your Light Rise in Darkness. This topic comes from the book of the prophet Isaiah. I'm going to mispronounce this, the Soncino translation version of the Bible, chapter 1, verses 1 to 11, and they read as follows. Cry out loud, spare not, lift up your voice like a shofar. Why have we fasted, say they, and you see not? Why have we afflicted our soul, and you take no knowledge? Is not this rather the fast that I have chosen? To loose the chains of wickedness, to undo the bands of the yoke, and to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry, and that you bring the poor who are cast out to your house? When you see the naked, that you cover them, and that you hide not yourself from your own flesh? If you draw out your soul to the hungry, and satisfy the afflicted soul, then shall your light rise in darkness, and your gloom be as the noonday. And God shall guide you continually, and satisfy your soul in drought, and make strong your bones, and you shall be like a watered garden, and like a spring of water whose waters fail not. And we're going to see how that all ties into this rest of this discussion a little bit later. But just for now, tell us a little about yourself. How did you become a rabbi? Why did you become a rabbi? What does it do for you?
Wow. Well,
in any sequence.
Sometimes I think it was temporary insanity that led me to this. It's not the usual path, I think. I have an undergraduate degree in zoology from UCLA.
Well, that qualifies you to work with people.
Right. That was, and clearly. And then I was trained as a medical technologist. That was a product of the Vietnam War. I would have probably gone on and gotten an advanced degree in biology, but they were drafting graduate students. So I became a medical technologist and viewed the war from afar, which was fine with me. But it was good because I had an interest in health and in medicine and so forth. So I did that for a number of years. Eventually, I met two rabbis that were people I could relate to as human beings in an adult relationship, rather than, say, the disapproving clergy. Oh, you didn't say the right blessing. You don't know this. Why don't you know this? People who accepted me for who I was and were very open to expressing what they believed were important principles of Judaism in conversation. And that opened a door for me. And it said, ultimately, when it came to pass, there's a place for you too in this fraternity at that time of rabbis. And then there was something else. One of them actually did my first marriage and was doing a trip to Israel, leading a congregational trip. So my first wife and I, my ex-wife, we had a choice to make. So this was a very important choice. We could have living room furniture, or we could go to Israel. So we did the responsible thing and went to Israel.
I second that.
Yeah, And it was a life-changing experience. It changed how I viewed myself, how I viewed Israel, how I viewed the Jewish people. I remember the first night when we landed, I was disappointed, actually. I had heard stories about people kissing the ground when they arrived in the land of Israel, and I felt close to nothing. I was in a foreign land. I didn't understand the language. And the reception was the plane stopped out on the tarmac, and we were immediately surrounded by military jeeps with machine guns, because that was in the age of a lot of hijackings. We were escorted in. We eventually went to the hotel, dropped our bags, and went for a walk along the main street of Tel Aviv, which is named for the first mayor of Tel Aviv, Dizengoff. And I was overwhelmed by a sensation of having come home. I looked around, and it was the first time in my life where truly I was in the majority. The ice cream seller, the falafel maker, the children running around in the streets were all Jews. This was right after Israel had signed the peace treaty with Egypt. It hadn't really been completely implemented yet. There was such a feeling of enthusiasm and optimism. It was contagious, and to be at a place where I'd heard about from childhood, hadn't really thought I'd go there, I connected in a way that I never thought I would. It was like getting into a nice warm bathtub, and all the tension about the trip and everything just went away. And then to find myself sort of walking in the paths of King David, King Saul, Isaiah, the layers of history, it's very different. Here in Santa Fe, we have the oldest church in America. In Israel, you're in Jerusalem, and they point to the walls of the old city, and they say, these are fairly recent. These were rebuilt by Suleiman the Magnificent about 450 years ago. Mm-hmm. That's relatively recent.
Yeah.
So there's a different scale to things there.
That's interesting you say that, and it's totally off topic, but that's something I've been talking about with people, because I really believe one of the problems with the American culture is we don't have that history that goes all the way back, and that it gives you a different perspective. You know, we celebrate 400 years here in Santa Fe, and we celebrate 225 years, and as a country or what, it's just
right.
You lose something. You don't have that sense of continuity, and all things pass and all things change yet. I think it's like being a teenager almost.
Yes, and there's something. There was something else. When I went, it was clearly after the 6-Day War. I went in 1979. And I got to do something that was denied to my parents and grandparents for 19 years. I got to go into the old city of Jerusalem. I got to go to, quote, the wall, which is not a wall of the temple. It's one of the retaining walls that King Herod built. But to be able to go there to that site, I felt it was very important to do that, because it had been denied to Jews for 19 years. When it was under Jordanian rule, let me put it that way.
Let me ask you a question. You talk about coming home, and there is a certain, I'm sensing, underlying combination of awe and passion as you're talking about this story. Do you think it was a prior life that you were there?
That's a very interesting question. I don't know. Well, certainly my family was. Prior life, oddly enough, of all the places where I felt I was there in a prior life, it was Paris. but Israel, there's a different connection. My ex-wife said to me, this really is your home. There's something about it. There's something about you. You're whole when you're there, and it's true. I don't know why there's this such an affinity to Jerusalem ultimately, but there is. There was a Hebrew poet, Jewish poet, who was asked, where are you from? He said, I'm from Jerusalem. Because of fate and a few lost wars, I was actually born in Poland. But I've always been from Jerusalem. And to some degree, I feel that way too. It's just, that's home. I lived there for a year during rabbinic school. I've been back a number of times. When I leave, there's always some piece of my soul or my heart or both that stays there, that's left behind.
So it was that first visit that got you into to school for becoming a rabbi?
Well, it's set the stage. I would put it that way. That and meeting these two rabbis and beginning to see a real sense of pride that I had in Jewish tradition and value that I found in it. In the ways that it deals with celebrating life, in the way that it deals with the very human side of somebody passing away. And to be able to be somebody who serves the Jewish community. And I think that's different. There is that sense in the rabbinate that that's what you're doing, is you're serving the Jewish community. It's a privilege, it's an honor, and it's something that I dearly love.
That segues right into what we were going to talk about. You and I had gotten together middle of last week and talked about what we wanted to talk about. And you had thrown out some topics, and I thought they were fantastic. And one of them is what we've been talking about all along, is you said religion must be transformative.
Yes.
What does that mean to you?
I think that the real goal of religion is not to have people who are strict adherents of the religion or people who become fanatics about it, where they devote the whole living of their life to the minutiae of the religion. But rather, religion seeks to take people who may not be the best people in the world and make of them what's called in Yiddish a mensch, a legitimate, upright, honest person. And I believe that Judaism in particular, though it does not have a monopoly on this, calls people to not only be better than they could be, but to be more than they could be. There's a line in the previous prayer book of the Reform movement that says, God, when somebody takes my hand, may they find your presence there. And I think in what we do in the world, we can make God's presence manifest. I've had people say to me over really very small things, oh, you're an angel. Or somebody will say to me, oh, God bless you. There was a story that I told about being in Los Angeles with my parents and going to Alvera Street late at night and being not quite accosted, but you never know, it's downtown, late at night, by this young man with a limp, and he wants money for food. I said, well, come with me. We're about to go over to my favorite taquito stand, and I'll buy you whatever you want. So we walk, and he's behind us, and we get there, and I tell him, order whatever you want. And he does, and I said, didn't order anything to drink. Don't you want, Pepsi or Coke or something? And he said, you mean I can? I said, yeah. When the food came, he turned to me and he said, God bless you. And I said, God already has. And I think that moment of being able to help somebody who's hungry, this didn't get him out of poverty, there's no overarching thing, but for that moment I was able to help somebody. And it's a question. Clergy are often called upon to bless people. Bless my baby, bless our wedding, I'm going on a trip, bless me. Who blesses the clergy?
I think the people who ask them to do the blessings.
Yes. And people like that, people who become the recipients of a good deed, really are the blessing. ultimately.
I think people are so, I don't want to, I'm not sure what term I want to use, but they see it as a one-way transaction. They don't see it as a two-way. That what we give, we get.
It's very much a synergy, and I think sometimes the more we give, the more we get.
Oh, definitely.
And the teaching of Judaism that I think of often is this thing about the world was left incomplete so that we could be partners with God in creating the world. And so it's a question, what kind of world do you want to create? And we do this every day in the things that we do. We create a world that's either warm and welcoming and compassionate or cold and uncaring. We have that power.
So do you see the incompletion as free will to deal with our brothers and sisters as we choose to? Is that what's incomplete? That there's no dictate, that there's a pointed direction, but we have the will to do it?
Well, I think there is a dictate, but we have the free will to ignore
Yes.
it, right, or carry it out. Yeah, I think that's certainly a part of it. We have the capability, perhaps, if we really put our minds to it, before we get to the tipping point, of perfecting the world. There is hunger in the world, not because necessarily there's not enough food, but because it's not distributed efficiently enough. There's something like 5% of the world's food production. If that could be redirected efficiently, there'd be no hunger. At least that was the figure a few years ago. We've eliminated smallpox from the world. We're on the verge of being able to eliminate polio. And there's a question here of some prejudice, of people not trusting that the vaccine that they're being given won't do harm, that the people that they're doing this to, because of religious differences, maybe you're trying to kill us. It makes me crazy because of the human suffering that polio represents, that it's in our power, we could eliminate it from the world. Rotary International, for one, has been involved in this for about 2 decades now. And we're very close. We're very, very close. And in our lifetime, I hope that we'll see polio eliminated. You're of an age, I think, where you can remember the March of Dimes was for polio.
Yeah.
And it was the Mother's March of Dimes to eliminate the scourge from our children. I remember growing up with somebody who had polio and had a limp, withered, left arm because of it. I remember the scenes of iron lungs. We don't have that in our country. We have the ability as humankind to give that gift of freedom from that disease to children all over the world.
And one of the things that you and I talked about, and to me it ties in, it's about giving up personal freedom. And giving up personal freedom, to me, also means giving up attachment. That we, as a culture, attach to the material, to the money, and think that it's ours, that we should have it, we should keep it, and we shouldn't share it.
Everything I have is a gift.
Mm-hmm.
And everything I have is on loan.
Yes, exactly.
And when you realize that, and you come to not fear it, but understand it, I think, and see it as an ongoing process, there's something that makes it very real. My wife and I, in particular me, have walked around with our daughter and said, okay, this painting was by this artist, and when we're gone, we think you should hold on to it. This poster, you can throw away. But when you begin to see these things pass on, when we go, I used to like to buy little tchotchkes, little trinkets on vacation. I don't do that anymore because A, the money could go somewhere else, and B, I realize that it's just something else that I'm going to pass on to our daughter that she's either going to have cluttering her house or she's going to throw out.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm much more interested now in I'm also into photography, so creating art with my photography when we travel, and capturing the beauty of the world for people to see who
That's
aren't
nice.
with us. So
everything we've been talking about goes right back to this topic, the prophetic topic, your light rise in darkness. I mean, we're here to be those lights for the people who are stumbling in the dark.
yes, but it's also interesting that in Reform Judaism, there is this sense that we carry on the prophetic imperative of what's called ethical monotheism, meaning that God is less interested in us carrying out the minute day-to-day things than the things that Isaiah talks about. And Isaiah's calling the Jewish people to task. Just because you're fasting on the Day of Atonement, you fast and God doesn't listen. Well, why not? Because you're not carrying over that lesson of what you're supposed to take from that day into the rest of your life. Care about the poor. The Bible, particularly the Torah, talks over and over again about the widow, the orphan, and the stranger. These are the disenfranchised in that society, and it was our responsibility, and still is, for us to take care of them. I think that's a point of religion. That's transformative. You transform the way society deals with the people that can't help themselves. I'm struck by the outpouring of compassion, caring, concern for the racehorse Barbaro when he broke his leg. He got get well cards and flowers, okay? But people will step over somebody who's sleeping on the street during the winter.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, I understand that we have a certain stewardship for the animals that is given to us by the Bible and by reality. But don't we have a stewardship for other human beings?
Well, and that's, a couple of things you said, and I'm part of a 12-step group. And one of the sayings they talk about is you keep what you have by giving it away. And one of the things that I have learned from life experiences is you actually, at some point, enhance what you have by giving it away. That is a law of increased returns or something.
Well, I'm coming to the end of Passover now.
Uh-huh.
And at the Seder, at the ritual meal at the beginning, we hold up the matzah, which is called the bread of affliction or the poor bread. It's not enhanced, it's just flour and water. And throughout generations, Jews have opened their doors and said, any who are hungry, come and eat. Now, I have to tell you, in my years at the synagogue, nobody has wandered in at that point. But we do make it a point to always have money set aside for those who can't afford it to come and be part of that meal. And we partner with an organization called Mazon, which means food in Hebrew. And they ask you to donate 3% of whatever you're doing, an anniversary party, a vacation, whatever, to them as a response to hunger. So we do that. We take 3% of the income from our Seder and we send it to Mazon. And my wife and I will do that. When we celebrate something very special, we'll make that donation. Because it's a way of how can I rejoice and truly be happy and appreciate the things that I have if I know that there are others that are in the bonds of poverty and hunger, which is one reason why I also serve on the Food Depot board here in Santa Fe.
Yeah, and I mean, it begs the question, because the Old Testament is at the basis of the New Testament, which is also the basis of the Quran. So, I mean, the three major Western religions are all coming from that same place, and somehow we're not getting the message.
Well, that's the point of clergy.
Yeah.
We're supposed to help people get that message. But there's also a resistance. We talked, you mentioned the comment about you give up personal freedom. In organized religion, it requires certain things of you. Now, for me, one of the demonstrations of that is during Passover, I don't get to eat anything with leavening in it. It's not just bread, it's cake and donuts and things that I love, soy sauce, no sushi during Passover. There's a question of discipline. There's something that you give up. And it's a reminder for me of the freedom that I have the rest of the year, even though I'm giving up personal freedom within this. I don't eat pork. I don't eat shellfish. I have in the past. I remember how good they are. Yes, it's a sacrifice for me to give those up. But why do it? Because it reminds me of who I am and that I'm not a free agent in this world. That I have a responsibility to the widow, the orphan, and the stranger, to the members of my congregation. And I was talking to a rabbinic colleague today who said, without my congregation, I'd be lost. They send my children to school. They buy my shoelaces. There is that. There has to be a synergy. And unfortunately, the message gets lost because there are clergy who get caught up in ego. There are congregations who don't want to hear the message. There are religious groups that I admire because their adherents willingly give 10% of everything they get to their movement.
So I've got two questions, because you've used the term reform. So we'll talk about the three different major schools of Judaism. But before I even do that, the other question is, how much of what you are talking about today is personal? How much of it is what Judaism teaches? Can that be separated? Because you're talking about clergy who don't get the message. So, I mean, I don't know if there's a way to quantify that or not.
Well, clergy are subject to the same human rules as any other profession. And I really believe there's a bell-shaped curve, which means that 65% of us in the clergy are mediocre.
Wasn't it 10% on each end?
Yeah. Roughly. I mean, you get out there at the outliers. I think for the good ones, it's very difficult to separate their personal beliefs from the religion, because you come to, if religion is truly transformative in you, you come to see the world through that lens of what you've been taught and what your responsibilities are and so forth. So I think, partly I owe a great deal of debt to my parents, who gave me not a perfect upbringing, absolutely not perfect, but remarkably wonderful to the best that they could. They're humans. They were flawed. My upbringing was flawed. So, but they're the first teachers that I had. I never remember a racial epithet in my home. That gives you a foundation in terms of avoiding prejudice. So there's that. They're my teachers through religious school, and particularly in rabbinic school, that were great influences on me. And so I am and I speak what I have become through life experience and living that life with Judaism. So I don't know that I could separate them particularly.
Which is kind of the answer I thought, but I just want to throw the question out there.
Because for me, Judaism says that your path through life has to be walked with honesty and integrity. And so I walk the path that I do, fighting for human rights as I can, doing what I can in terms of hunger. It's partly why I helped found the Interfaith Leadership Alliance in Santa Fe, to bring religious leaders together so we could get to know each other, put aside theological differences, and do the greater good. And to get back to the other part of the question, if you're ready for it.
In a second, I just want to pop in, because you remember the Ministerial Alliance? I think it was just about breaking up when you got to town.
Yes, it was, and they were deep in the throes of who could be a member and who not. And I thought you've been around for all these years, and that's your this is the issue that's the burning issue at the moment.
Actually, you know what's because I was there. I was the secretary at the time, and my perception was what we were talking about: clergy who are unwilling to stand up for what they were supposedly believing and preaching. It happened right around 9/11, where the Alliance wanted to make a statement, and there were clergy there who were like, I can't do this because my congregation wouldn't like it. And I mean, I don't have a congregation that let me in, and I'm sitting there like, who's, is the cart before the horse, or the horse before the cart?
Well, I think there's always going to be some synergy between the clergy and the congregation, some interaction, some shaping. But as clergy, it's up to us to lead.
Exactly.
And the quote that I think of is from Rabbi Israel Salanter, who lived in the 19th century, who said that a rabbi whose congregation always agrees with him is not a rabbi. And
yes.
A rabbi who fears his congregation is not a mensch, is not truly a man, an honest, upright human being. So I think you have to judge it. If you get people angry, they're not going to listen, they're not going to hear. But there also has to be, there's this great little piece about what's the role of a rabbi and probably all clergy: to comfort the afflicted, but also to afflict the comfortable.
Yes.
And if you're not doing both, you're not doing your job. We are supposed to be, we talked about religion being transformative, the clergy are supposed to be agents of change. However good you are, you can be better. And that's, let me rephrase that. However good we are, because I'm part of this process too, we can be better. I can be better. What was good enough for me last year ought not to be good enough for me this year.
Because change is constant.
And it should be changed for the better.
Yeah.
I should constantly be learning lessons in my life. I should be open to people who have lessons to teach. It's also one of the teachings of Judaism: make every person your teacher. Now, it doesn't say make every rich person your teacher. It doesn't say make every poor person your teacher. Everybody has a lesson to teach. Sometimes it's a negative lesson. Sometimes you can look at somebody and they teach you, don't do that.
There but the grace of God go I.
Right.
Exactly.
Oh boy. I am so lucky in this life. Blessed, some would say, but I think sometimes people use that as in a very egotistical way. So, I'm grateful for the life that I have and the gifts that I have that come along the way. And honestly, I wouldn't be the rabbi that I am without this congregation in Santa Fe. There's no question in my mind. It comes to this. Several years ago, I was at the legislature for nearly a full week. I was asked to testify at various committees about different laws, trying to get domestic partnership passed, get the death penalty changed, a variety of things. At the board meeting that followed that, I reported on what I had done, and one of the board members said, "Isn't it wonderful that the rabbi is there representing our interests?" There are other congregations where they would have said, "Rabbi, how dare you spend so much time away from the congregation," rather than seeing it as part of the mission of the congregation to enhance human rights. So I'm lucky to be here. I'm lucky to have a congregation and a board that's supportive. But the reality is, if they weren't,
you wouldn't be here.
I wouldn't be here. I'd have to leave and go to a place, and they're open to my teaching. That's the other piece. Sometimes the medium is the message. Sometimes the teacher is the message, and you have to find somebody for a congregation that they will listen to, because otherwise you're beating your head against a wall as clergy. So we have a good match, and that gives me a tremendous amount of freedom, but I can't be afraid of the congregation. I can't.
Agreed. Yeah, I mean, and that was the problem I had, and there was a point because I didn't have a congregation, I didn't feel like maybe I should be there. But when this started, I realized I'm okay. It's like, yeah,
Right.
it was an interesting experience.
And I have to say, likewise, the congregation can't be afraid of me either.
Yeah, that's just that wouldn't work in either direction.
Though it is interesting, occasionally I'll say to somebody, an adult in their 40s or 50s, come back to my office, I want to talk to you for a moment.
Uh-oh.
And right, that's always the reaction. Rabbi, what did I do wrong?
Call them to the principal's office.
Like, yeah, right. It's like, no, I just want to talk to you. It's okay.
What did I do to upset God?
Right. I don't know, and I typically don't take confession, but if you want to tell me, it's okay. I'd enjoy hearing the story.
So let's get back to the three forms of Judaism.
The major movements really came about as we have them now in the 19th century, in the 1800s, where you had Judaism has always through its history had movements that sought to, if you will, reform it. I think sometimes it gets lost in the secularism of it, but that's what they were about. So Hasidic Judaism was an attempt to take a Judaism where the mainstream had become so involved in study that it was isolated from the regular people. And so Hasidic Judaism sought to recapture the essence of Judaism and bring it to the regular folks, to those who were working the fields and who were illiterate and who didn't have the time to just go study or the money. So that was really a reform movement even further back. And there were others along the way. So you have in Europe, particularly in Germany, in the mid-1800s, this sense of the Age of Enlightenment, of reason, and questioning why are we doing certain things that don't seem to enhance our spirituality. So, for instance, I'm dressed as any normal American would dress. Well, in those days, Jews dressed differently. And was that really authentic? So Reform became a religion, a movement of assimilating into mainstream culture as it was being allowed, as Jews were being enfranchised in the societies then, starting with the French Revolution, where Napoleon came to the Jewish community in France and said, is it possible for you to be citizens of the state, which you're not now, you're resident aliens? Can you truly be French citizens and still be Jews? They studied that for a year, came back and said, yes, we can be French citizens. So they became enfranchised in France, and then that went on. And in the process, by the way, it destroyed the entire fabric of Jewish life as it existed in Europe. But what we gained out of that was an entrance into the modern world. We got to go to regular colleges and universities and gymnasia and so forth. And Reform movement comes along with that and says, how can we best be Jews in this environment, in this world? We're being weighed down by thousands of years of custom that don't necessarily serve us.
Such as?
Well, one of the things was, do we have to have our heads covered all the time? Do I have to wear a kippah all the time? Or even when I'm praying? Again, do I have to wear the kaftan that was worn? Do I have to wear only black, which the Hasidic Jews tend to do? It also got into some issues of, in order to be a good Jew, do I have to keep kosher? When they got into those sorts of things, the moral and ethical laws were all things that they supported. But there also came to be a question of, was the entire Torah revealed to Moses at Mount Sinai? That becomes one of the real dividing points. If you believe that the whole thing, as we have it, is an inerrant text, God's word, given to Moses at Mount Sinai, he writes it down, and that's how we have it, you are now orthodox, which becomes correct belief. If you don't believe that, you are in a non-orthodox movement, whether you are Reform or Conservative or Reconstructionist, whatever it may be, Jewish Renewal. Once you take that step that says this is a document that's passed through human hands, it is divine. It's certainly divinely inspired. But there are things in it that aren't compelling now. For instance, okay, I wonder how many of the viewers would believe that anyone who commits adultery should be stoned to death. Now, there are societies in this world that still do that.
Yeah.
I don't believe that that's the appropriate punishment.
My number might be off, but isn't there something in the neighborhood of 618 daily commandments?
You're in the neighborhood. It's 613.
13.
You're doing very good.
13 or 18.
You're right.
Yeah.
Well, 18 being chai, which means life, you were close. There are different lists of 613 different commandments we're supposed to do. There are 248 don'ts for every bone in the human body, and 365 do's, one for each day. Some of these, though, for as much as somebody says, oh, I keep all the mitzvot, the commandments, they don't, because some of them cannot be kept unless A, you're living in the land of Israel, and B, the temple is standing in Jerusalem, and if there's a king. So we don't have a king, we don't have a temple, so there are certain things that cannot be fulfilled now.
And as time passes over thousands of years, some of them that maybe had validity at the time they were established no longer are valid.
Well, that's the approach of the Reform movement. You know, are these things resonant in our lives? Do they enhance our spirituality? Do they make us better people? Or are they simply a burden, a hindrance? Now, for the Orthodox, they will never ask, is it still valid? In fact, they do the opposite. Don't ask what it was about, but because if you do, you may find that it doesn't make sense to you now, and you'll stop doing it.
Blind obedience.
Which makes me crazy. For instance, okay, there is the custom that a Jewish woman shaves her head when she gets married and wears a wig. And she lets her hair grow, only her husband gets to see her real hair. Why? Because if you go back to Europe, hundreds of years ago, the local nobleman had the right of the marriage bed. He could sleep with the bride on her wedding night before the groom did. So because Jewish men at that time couldn't protect their families and couldn't protect their wives, they had them shave their heads so the nobleman came in and saw this bald woman and he'd say, oh, she's so ugly, who wants to sleep with that? Well, I'm hoping that in today's world, we have the ability to protect our families. So, there's a tradition, there's a custom, a law, a mitzvah that's been enshrined as you have to do this, and it's enshrining something really awful, that we're not able to protect our families. I don't live in that environment. So, for me, I don't want my wife to shave her head. Okay? And the joke about this is the little kid is watching her mother cook a brisket. And in the Christian world, they have the story told about a ham. But the mother cuts the end of the brisket off and puts it in the pot. And the little girl says, why do you do that? I don't know, that's how my mother did it. So they call grandma, and grandma doesn't, that's how my mother did it. They call great-grandma, and she says, oh, of course. I never had a pot that was big enough. Right? But it became enshrined as part of the family recipe. So I'm one, as a fine, upstanding Reformed Jew and rabbi, I believe that we look at our rituals and we ask, are they meaningful? Do they enhance our life experience or not? And by the way, to finish up, the conservative movement is a neither. They're neither Orthodox nor are they Reformed. They're in the middle, which makes it very difficult for them to define themselves because as the two poles shift of necessity, they shift, and they're having a tremendous difficulty right now as the Reform movement becomes more traditional than it used to be 40 years ago. The conservative movement is finding that its role is diminishing in the world.
Which makes sense. What you're talking about I have a definition of purpose, so to speak, for religion, for theology, which basically says it's to take the uninitiated and get them to a place where they are no longer bound completely by the tenets that initiated them.
It's not a very Jewish approach. But that's...
But are you not saying that by deciding that some of these commandments no longer have relevancy as opposed to blindly following them?
Yes, there is that, but there's also a strand in Judaism that says as you progress, as you become more spiritually enlightened, the path becomes narrower.
Yeah.
And the punishments become greater if you stray from the path. Think of it this way. If a 2-year-old throws a tantrum in the supermarket, people may be understanding because it's a 2-year-old. But that kind of behavior on the part of a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old is seen as being really inappropriate. There's got to be some learning along the way and a narrowing of what's appropriate and what's not.
Well, that was the implication, but I mean,
okay.
Because what you're talking about with the Orthodox, there's a great line in the Tao Te Ching that says, the greatest masters are not the one with the most students. The greatest masters are the ones who create the most masters.
It's great. Yes, absolutely.
And I think too many congregations play a numbers game and don't look to, they want to keep people contained to support the structure, so to speak. And they lose their sense of purpose, which is to teach these people how to transform, how to transcend.
Right. Well, one of the things that we do is we try to teach people to dialogue with the text and keep it real in their lives. And that's giving them a tremendous amount of freedom, which I think is essential. And the other side of this is, in terms of morality and ethics, Tiger Woods was on TV this morning apologizing to the press and so forth, and somebody had a comment that they don't look to Tiger Woods as a moral compass.
Good for them.
But you're right. But you would hope that you could look to a Catholic priest as a moral compass, to a rabbi as a moral compass. They're human and they're flawed, but nevertheless, you would hope that they have some greater understanding. My thing is, when you get to, I have a brother-in-law in Jerusalem who's ultra-Orthodox. He lives his life in support of the tradition rather than using the tradition to support his life.
Yeah.
And that's where I think the emphasis goes wrong. And that's where he's not the master. He has to go to his rabbi to say, is this okay? Is that okay? You give up your humanity, your intellect, your ability to choose, and you give it over to somebody else. Now,
that's an addiction.
Yeah. I mean, it's not that people don't come to me and say, what does Jewish law say about this or that? And want to know if there's a right way or a wrong way to do a particular thing. But they will ultimately have to decide after Jewish law says X, whether or not they're going to follow that particular thing. If I say to my congregants, by the way, particularly in Santa Fe, tortillas are not kosher for Passover. And they say, but Rabbi, but they're flat. And I say, but no, that's not the issue. The issue is whether or not they have leavening and so forth, and the technicalities of it. They're the ones who will decide whether or not during Passover they're going to eat tortillas or not. And I can't say to them, particularly some of the people I'm thinking of, that they're not good Jews if they eat a tortilla during Passover, because they're getting the other part, that prophetic imperative.
The social awareness in action.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. They're doing the things that the religion teaches us to do. And if not eating a tortilla is not particularly meaningful to them, or that the flatness is symbolic enough for them, then fine, they've gotten the message. And the message of Passover is, you are slaves, don't do that to anybody else. Don't oppress other people. When you get that message and you go on, and the holiday serves to renew in you that spark to fight for human rights, to realize that you're not free when other people are in chains, then the holiday has served its purpose. Whether or not you eat the matzah becomes secondary.
I need to interrupt. We're going to have a little bit of time left, but I have a few announcements I have to make.
Please.
Then we'll come back with some parting thoughts.
Okay.
Unity Santa Fe, which is up on 1212 Unity Way, which is right off of 599, the relief route, has a fairly interesting schedule in the upcoming week. So I want to let you know about a couple of things. This Friday, which is April 9th at 7 o'clock, is the reemergence of the Sacred Feminine, an evening of conversation with Mary Magdalene, presented by Kevin Blackwell. Kevin will share insights he has received about the reemergence of the Sacred Feminine and the development of the new path of awakening that celebrates the transformation power of emotions, living from an open heart and ways of love. There's going to be a love offering. I can't talk about money on the air, but we'll give you a number you can call. Then Sunday the 11th is at 1 p.m., Attraction, Eyes, and Relationships, presented by Jim Vergas. I'm probably butchering his name. He's a behavioral iridologist. The workshop will explore iris patterns and the nature of attraction, purpose of love and intimacy, the value of emotions, and communication. First 20 participants will have their eyes photographed and a mini interpretation done. Again, there's a love offering. Finally, on Tuesday the 13th at 7 p.m., Metaphysics 1 with Reverend Brendelin. Curious about those intangible, non-physical aspects of life? Open your heart and mind to divine ideas will bring you greater love, health, and prosperity. Learn to apply practical spiritual principles, realize more of your spiritual potential, and find your life transformed. Also, again, a love offering. Some of them are real open. Some of the love offerings are specific. Call 505-989-4433 for more information. Wow, okay. Just want to let you all know that this is public TV, public access TV. You are invited to participate. I am looking for people to want to talk about their personal experiences with the religion of their birth, why they are or not there. I want to do a show on that. I'm also looking for somebody who would want to sit down and talk with me about Edgar Cayce. So my contact information has been flashing on the screen. Feel free to contact me. Let's talk about it. Also, next week, my guest is going to be Professor Daniel Dennett. We're going to talk about is congregational religion becoming obsolete. Also, last announcement, I am a spiritual counselor. I do counseling of all kinds. I believe without a spiritual component, there is no healing. I'm a state-licensed alcohol drug abuse counselor as well as an ordained minister, and I combine the two in what I think is a fairly unique format. And if you think I could be of help to you, I work on a donation basis. So give me a call. Again, my number and my email are flashing across the screen. I'm not used to talking that much. So we're going to have about 5 minutes left, roughly. Parting thought.
Parting thought, I think the next show about is congregational life still valid is an important one. I think that in our world, as population increases, as city size increases, the need for substructures of community becomes very important. And whether or not you see the church, the synagogue, the mosque as a place just to worship God, and I think if that's how you see it, it's a mistake. it's really meant to be community, where we help each other, we comfort each other, we celebrate together. And in fact, there are times when I think if you look for God in the sanctuary, you're looking in the wrong place.
Where should you be looking?
Out amongst the people in the world, in your life, where you're open to the idea of an angel coming into your life, because the word angel really means messenger in its purest form. People that can lead you, help you to grow. And there are times when you can be an angel to others. I've had people come into my life who literally were messengers, were angels, and had this message to deliver. That's part of the way I became a rabbi. A woman who I knew sat down next to me, hit me on the knee and said, "Well, now you're ready to be a rabbi?" 5 years later, after rabbinic school, she had no memory of the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But now, some 30 years later, I still remember it vividly because it was a turning point in my life.
Do you believe in divine synchronicity? That these things don't happen by accident?
Oh, yes. One of the rabbis I met was the now, unfortunately, late David Lieb, who taught me that coincidence is God's way of remaining anonymous.
Exactly.
And I think that, I don't pray to find a parking space. And I don't pray to decide if I should get a new water heater. But I pray for the strength to live my life. And when I look back at my life, I do see God's fingerprints in my path. I had free will to follow the paths that I did, but nevertheless, I see God opening doors for me. My choice to go through them or not.
Somebody used to tell a story about talking about their God, that their God had a flat forehead. And like, what are you talking about? And the person went on to go, well, every time I got to a crossroads and God said, turn right, I turned left. God would go, he didn't get it.
Yeah. Well, I also believe that I think we get the kind of God that we visualize.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for those people who think that there is a hell and so forth, and that God is a judgmental and punishing God, that's what they're going to get. And if you believe that God is forgiving and understanding of what the human condition is, then God will understand.
Yes, I agree.
And I'm already working on my high holiday sermons for the upcoming holidays in the fall, and I'm working on the 7 questions that you're asked in heaven.
Maybe we'll do a show on that.
It would be wonderful, because the point is not to wait until then, but to ask yourself these questions now.
Now, exactly. Rabbi, I got to cut you off as much as I hate to. You'll come back?
It'd be a pleasure.
Looking forward to it. I want to thank you all for listening. You're hearing a message. Now it's up to you to do something with it. I believe that God has chosen to put us on the TV, put you in front of this TV, watch us, listen to us. Now you've got to do something, because God will not do for you what you can do for yourself. God will only do for you what you can't do for yourself. So the message here is social action. The parts are not greater than the whole. Do something. Help somebody. Love somebody. Until next week, love and light, everybody. I'm Reverend Phil, and I've been your host for Words of the Prophets. Thank you for tuning in. Please join me again next week, same time, same channel, for more Words of the Prophets.